The ability to change your heart is the ability to stay true what God wants from you. The ability to change your heart is the ability to stay true to what God wants from you. You've got to be able to change, but you can't stay true. You heard that from Paul, and I've had that in my ministry. The year was 2007, and it became obvious that the ministry that I knew, that I did in Germany, would come to an end soon. So we explored new options, and we found new places, and eventually ended up here in Provo, Utah. I tried different routes, doing other things in my home country, looked at some job opportunities, sent out some applications. It was easier for me to switch countries than it was to switch professions. Sometimes you just got to give up things in order to stay true what God needs you to do. Paul was on his mission, and his mission was to weed out those crazy Christians. He was like the Inquisition. His job was to get rid of that Christian sect and restore the purity of Judaism. And he was good at it. He was extremely good at it. He had deeply held convictions on how proper religion should be done. They did it wrong, and he needed to correct that. Now, that one weird day on his way to Damascus, he saw a light. He later identified it to be Christ. And by that light, he was blinded and turned around and changed. That's a hard thing to do, especially when you're totally convinced of your righteousness, of your purpose. You know exactly what you're doing and why. He was a train engine, full steam ahead. He did the right thing in the name of God. And all of a sudden, God hits him in the face and says, no. And he has to pull that emergency brake on his train, come to a full halt, go in a different direction. Being strong, being the same you've always been, is not what God's people do. God's people defy the law of motion that says that train cannot be stopped. It's way too hard. It can't be stopped. It can't be turned around. God's people are constantly turned around. And God's people, like Lot's wife, should look back. Because back then, that wasn't good. That's why you came here. That's where you're going, where you're going. Not because of where you came from, but because of where you're headed. In the right direction, forward. Israel has always lived like that. When you look at the Old Testament, it's full of progressive theology. The biggest thing they accomplished is to unite their faith. In the beginning, you had 4 nomadic tribes living off of the ground, the dirt that they lived on. And they just happened to live in their families and clans on that little piece of land that they called theirs, and that's how you lived. But that's not how you become a great nation. They become one great nation by getting together, by combining families into clans, into tribes, and eventually into one kingdom. And that also meant that they had to give up their family gods. Every family had their little statues in their houses. They worshipped them. They sacrificed a little wheat, a little meat, a little whatever they did. And their God was satisfied with it. Now when you merge politically, militarily, and all the other ways, economically, you also have to look at that faith piece. They did. There's a reason the Bible is pounding idols and false gods and all that, because they needed to unite, because everybody had their own little God, and they needed to be one, so they needed to have one God. And they managed to do that, to get rid of those little statues in their homes and join in one worship for one people. That's tough. Getting rid of those little statues. The prayer that your mama taught you when you were a baby. Probably still know that. Maybe your theology doesn't necessarily match that anymore. Maybe you've grown up in your faith, but some of the rituals that you learned as a baby, as a toddler, as a child in Sunday school, maybe those rituals and those thoughts are still in your head even though they don't match any of your adult self anymore. It's hard to let go of those. We're grown-ups now. There's more progressive theology in ancient Israel. Their treatment of slaves. Yes, they had slaves. Yes, we need to not call that good. But the way they did that, they had humans as slaves. Ancient cultures treated slaves like things. You use them, you break them, you throw them away, you get new ones. Israel was different. In Israel, slaves were at least regarded as persons. Lower class persons, all the problems that come with it. But at least their relationships, their marriages, the bonds between parents and children, they were respected in a way. You don't just sell one spouse to that direction and one to the other. You keep them together. You don't separate children from their parents. They're somewhat human. And don't you think we're beyond all that? Be honest to yourself and look at how you react to different skin colors of people. How proud you felt when the black man was elected president. That made a difference. Whether you liked it or not, but you felt something about it. When I see some of our teens posting on Facebook, hanging out with the kid face today. That's a positive thing, but it speaks to the fact that color of skin matters. I'm not over that. It matters. Israel has learned that making those differences less important eventually disappear in the course of human history. That's the progress our God wants. There's more progressive theology in ancient Israel. That story that we heard from Joshua, how he sent out 2 scouts to find a way into the promised land, how to get a hold of that city, how to eventually conquer all of Israel for God's people. Who made that happen? Who helped God's people conquer the Holy Land? Prostitute. One of the most important people in Israel's history. Rahab the prostitute reappears in Jesus' pedigree later on. A prostitute makes the people of God great. And the early church was based on the ministry of strong women, like Mary and Mary Magdalene, nurturing Jesus' ministry, Lydia financing Paul's ministry. The church that we know is based on strong women. And yet, when we saw Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State in that position of power, or when this week we remembered Maggie Thatcher as the Prime Minister of Great Britain. No, they're not role models of feminism, I know that. But they are women of power that we would usually ascribe to male roles. Yet these women own them with their sexuality, with their being. That's what our God is working with. That is what our ministry, that the ministry of our God has always been based on. There is more progressive theology in ancient Israel. Paul comes in with this ministry of bringing the Gentiles to the God of Israel. Those that were not proper Jews. Like us here. We're not legit. We can't be part of God's people. Because we weren't born to a Jewish mother. We're just Gentiles. Yet Paul opened his ministry to Romans and Greeks and folks like us that were not part of God's people. Jesus wouldn't want that. He fought against it, just like Paul did before. He called it casting pearls before the swine. Those unworthy people that, eat pig. You can't allow them into God's loving community. Well, Paul corrected that. We can be part of God's people. We're invited too. The question comes, who's good enough to be part of God's people? Is it by birth? Is it by the way you look? Is it by the way you act? Is it by the way that you believe? None of that really matters. Progress towards inclusion is what has always happened. Ever more inclusion, ever more expansion, ever more invitation. That's what has motivated this country and also our whole denomination, the United Church of Christ. We've valued that from the very get-go. When you look at the history of how we as a denomination have treated different people in the ministry, we were always the first ones for more radical inclusion. In 1785, we ordained the first black man. In 1853, the first woman pastor, and in 1972, the first openly gay pastor. That was some decades, centuries ago. We're the first ones in those situations. Are we the first ones in our circle of influence? As individuals? Where are you at? When now women can be officially in combat. Where gay marriage is on the run in many, many states. Where are you at? Are you with us in that progress? I don't care for your answer right now. I'm interested in the question that you ask. I'm interested in the question that you ask when faced with new developments. And that makes all the difference. The conservative question would be, what was the answer in one certain historic context and how can we restore it? The progressive question would be, what can we learn from the past and how can we create an even better future from there? Yeah, Margaret Thatcher is an example of political equality for women. And we mourn her losses. But looking back at her was good for all the memorials they did this past week. What matters more, as a matter of fact, though, is that she enabled women to come into those positions of power. And Angela Merkel of Germany would not have been possible without the legacy of Maggie Thatcher. That's the future that even conservative movements long for. Progress is coming and we're here to embrace it. Our God demands it from us. And let me give you an example how asking the progressive question and thinking forward how that works. I did a little math here. I'm not good at math, but some I can. Marriage equality is coming to Utah in the year 2028. Brace yourselves. Here's why. It happened in New York in 2011. And the LDS Church was established in New York in 1830. And Mormons were given a hard time wherever they went for years and years, and eventually they found a safe haven in Utah in 1847. So for new developments, it takes 17 years to make it from New York to Utah. Worked in the 1800s, will work in the 21st century again. Brace yourself, Utah. You will open yourself again for people you have dreamed of. It has happened before. It's It's going to happen again. And the reality of Utah culture is, all it means to be conservative around here is that everything is one generation behind on societal development. We must not be that way. All changed. The United Church of Christ stands for progress, and our mission for Utah Valley is to promote the way forward. Amen.